This week we're going to be talking about oral reading and how important it is to listen to your students read on a regular basis and all of the benefits that you as a teacher can get from listening to your students read. In the earlier grades, in K1, 2, it's important that you're hearing all of your students read pretty regularly. For 3rd, 4th, and 5th, or once they become fluent, it's okay to listen to them read orally occasionally just to check on their fluency, but it isn't necessary that you're listening to them read every day as it is a struggling reader. And listening to your students read orally can give you a lot of great information for your instruction and your interventions with your struggling readers. For instance, you can tell if a student is monitoring or paying attention to what they're doing, if they're noticing their errors. We've talked a lot about noticing, as well as being able to watch some of their facial cues and different things that you can see by observing them. They may look at you and then you know they're appealing for some answers or for some help versus trying something on their own. And I'm going to be referring to some pages that I sent you. And the first one I'm looking at is the observations of reading behaviors from a running record. We're going to learn how to record a student's reading in a way that helps us identify, are they using the visual? Are they using the meaning? Are they using structure? What are they using so that you know where their gaps are and that you know how to fill in and what instruction that they're needing. And so, for example, does the student read for meaning? Or are they just making up words as they read or skipping words, so they're going to be missing out parts of the story? Does the student read fluently? Are they choppy? Do they reread if they come to a word they don't know? Do they go back and read it again? Or if they start to lose comprehension or the structure, do they go back and start it over again? Are they checking? Are they confirming? Are they using language structures? And so the first couple things I want to talk to you about are those cueing systems that we talked about in the last class, but as a quick reminder, I'm looking at this sheet here, which is the MSV cheat sheet, and also that was provided to you. And the first thing I want to talk to you about is the meaning. And meaning is asking yourself, what would make sense? So the meaning can be everything, including the pictures, the story structure, the sense of story a student might have, their background knowledge, their experiences with text and in life, anything that helps them pull meaning from text. And so for the example that I have used before, we talk about, I'm going to use a check mark for every word that is correct, and then I'm going to show you what the reader might say instead. So if a reader were reading for meaning, if the text said, I like to see, and the text says horses at the farm, then the reader says, I like to see ponies at the farm. And ponies, as you know, means the same thing as horses. So the reader made an error here, a substitution, but it didn't really change the meaning. There might have been a big picture of a horse, or they might have been thinking about the farm, or something in their own experiences. But either way, the reader didn't look at the actual text carefully because these words do not visually look similar. Also, that's meaning. The next one I wanted to talk to you about is the structure. The student asks, well, does it sound right? Can we say it that way? The structure of the text, is it acceptable in the English language? So in this example, I like to fly horses at the farm. The reader says fly. The text says, I like to see. So structurally, grammatically, in in our language, it's okay for us to say, I like to fly. Now, if we said, I like to fly horses at the farm, it wouldn't make sense. But grammatically, it can work. But if the reader said, I like fly horses at the farm, I like fly horses at the farm, then that grammatically doesn't work. So up to the error, if the error, if it makes sense or sounds right, if the grammar is correct, then they are using structure. But if they say, I like fly, then they are not using structure because that's not a proper structure in our grammatical structure in our language. And so this example here, I like to fly horses at the farm, it doesn't make sense. So they're not using meaning. It doesn't look similar to see. And so they're not using visual, but their structure or their grammar is okay. And so that's use of structure. And structure has to do with grammar and our language and how our words go together to sound great. And then the final one is visual. And this one seems to be sometimes confused because you think with visual that you're talking about the pictures. Well, the pictures are, of course, seen through our visual system. But when we're talking about visual here, we are talking about two words that look similar. How do the words look? Do they have similar parts? For example, I like to see, the reader says houses at the farm. The text says horses. And if the reader says, I like to see houses at the farm, they're not using meaning because it just doesn't make sense. And especially if there was a giant picture of a horse, then then they definitely weren't using some of their other clues, like looking at the pictures, some of the strategies. But if you look carefully at the word houses and horses, they're very similar. They are almost identical except for one letter, which is in the middle. And a lot of our readers look at the first letter and the last letter, especially as they're developing. They don't look all the way through words, so it's not uncommon for them to make an error like this. But what we would hope is, as the reader says, I like to see houses at the farm, their meaning kicks in and they say, oh, I like to see horses at the farm, and they correct it or self-correct it. They go back, they reread it, and they fix it. And so in order for them to be using the visual, the words have to look visually similar. And so houses and horses, this reader is using the visual, but not the meaning. The structure is also okay, because we can say, I like to see houses up to that point of error. So the point is, we want our readers to be able to use all three of these systems flexibly. And when they try one thing, if it doesn't work, then another system kicks in and they try it another way. So we're trying to build readers who are efficient and flexible in their thinking and their monitoring as they're reading. So that's a little bit about the meaning, structure, and visual. And you'll see in a little bit why this is important, because after we record the errors on a running record of a reader, then we will go back and analyze each individual error to see, are they using meaning, are they using structure, are they using visual? The next thing I want to talk to you about are the three levels. The first level is the independent level. And when we give the BRI, we are going to be identifying our readers independent level, their instructional level, and their frustration level. And what the independent level tells us is where our reader can read fluently without help, they sound smooth, they make very few errors, their word recognition is 96 to 99% accuracy, so they're making 4 or less errors per 100 words. This is also a 90% comprehension, and we want our readers to be here during pleasure reading. So if students who take the STAR test or AR, reading counts, they will have a zone score that they give them, and it starts down in their independent level. So students who are reading on their own, we want them to be reading at the level of this independent level, because they're not going to struggle, they're not going to get frustrated. A reader at this level says, I can do this, this is easy, I like to read. Whereas when we're working with them at an instructional level, we want to take it up a notch. So this independent level is extremely important for our sustained silent reading or read to self at any time that the reader is going to be doing any kind of reading on their own. So it's kind of easy to remember independent reading, independent level. The next level is the instructional level, and this is their zone of proximal development. This reader says, this can sometimes, I can do this if I get a little help. This can sometimes be a challenge, but my teacher is there to support me. And so this is where we want our readers to be when we're doing small group reading, guided reading, any kind of instruction that we're doing. We want our reader to be at their instructional level. So it's important in the BRI to attain their instructional level, because that's where their teaching is going to, that's where you're going to get the most bang for your buck, where it's going to be the most powerful for teaching. And their comprehension is good at this level. It's 75 to 85%. Their word recognition is good, 90 to 95% accurate. So that's 10 or less errors per 100 words. And then the guided reading, as I said, this is best used for instructional purposes. The other level, final level, is frustration level, and it's too hard. A reader says, I can't do this, I don't like reading. And this is one of the reasons that a lot of our students don't like to read, is because their book buckets that they have in their classroom or the text that they're selecting at the library is too difficult for them to read on their own. So they're not getting any meaning out of it. They're not getting any practice on fluency. It's actually pretty much wasting their time. So we never want them to be at frustration level, but we have to get them to frustration level to know their highest instructional level, because we want to know where that point is that they are still learning versus that point where it's just too difficult and not going to be effective for teaching. So the only time we're going to see our readers at frustrational level, ideally, is for diagnostic purposes. So when you're giving the BRI, we're going to take them through passages that become frustration for them, but that's where we're going to stop. And we don't want our readers to think that reading has to be so difficult. And when you start seeing them reading word by word, super slow, that it's really choppy, it's not really making any sense, they're skipping words, they're looking at you for help, they're fidgeting, sometimes they put their hand to their head, that you can just tell that they're getting frustrated. That's a pretty good sign that the text is too difficult for the reader. And again, we don't want our readers here for instructional level. We don't want our readers here for independent level by any means. Now, if you are working with a small group and there is a reader in there that maybe you're adding to that group, that particular level you're using might be might be frustration for them, but if you provide them with a little more support, then you are more likely to get them to more of an instructional level with them. You might have to do a stronger book walk or book introduction, plant some more vocabulary as you do that, and talk a little bit more about the text before, during, and after in order for that reader to be successful with it. But it is possible. And it's a fine line, and it's a balance that teachers are constantly trying to figure out, and especially with the younger readers as they grow and change so quickly, it's very easy to assume they're ready to go into a next level text, but just remember, as you change text levels, that you're going to need to provide some more support and then back off as they become more independent on that level. The next thing that we're going to do is talk about running records, and we're going to look at the other page of the MSV cheat sheet. It's called the Running Record Cheat Sheet, and it looks like this. And it has several sections on it, and we're going to talk about them, and then we will do a little bit of practice as far as how that's going to look, what your role is going to be as you record a running record of a child reading. And so, first of all, the running record cheat sheet has at the bottom the meaning, structure, and visual. So there's a nice little reminder of you as we get to analyzing the running record as to what the reader is using and where to go instructionally from there. But if you look at the codes, these are some of the codes that we're going to be using and practicing as we record text. We're also going to be using this packet. It is taking running records, and it has quack, quack, quack at the top, pages 4 and 5. This is our practice packet, and I know it's going to be a little awkward with video, and what I'm going to suggest that you do is that you pause the video after each item that we discuss and practice, so that you can then check the next page and see if you're correct. Now, if you look at the first page, there is text there. And a running record can be given with a blank piece of paper. Many times I sit down with a student, listen to them read, and I have a blank piece of paper. I put the title, I put the date, I put the student's name, and then as they read, I'm putting check marks for all of the correct words that they say. If they make a mistake, I will put the information on the page. For example, the text goes on the bottom, whatever the word is, and then whatever the student says goes on top. So if a student substitutes a word for another word, some of the examples might be cannot for can't, Tim for Tom, can for can't, cat for kitten. Those are all substitutions. Anything that differs from text is a substitution. But what you record is what the student says on top of the line and what the text says on the bottom. And that's always going to be the rule of thumb for how we're recording errors in a running record. And the first error that we're going to practice recording are the substitutions. And substitutions can't, as I showed you with the meaning, structure, and visual, they can be meaning change, like houses for horses. They can be structurally okay, or they can, I like fly, not work with the structure, or they can visually look similar and not make sense. So it doesn't matter at this point what the error is, you're just recording it. And you know that a substitution is always one error that's going to count against the student. So if you flip over to the next page, page 12 of the packet, you will see a lot of check marks. And this is what that's going to look like after we practice. Hopefully, you're going to be able to flip the page and check the check to see that you accurately scored the reader. I'm going to be the reader, and I'm going to read the text, and you're going to record. And we're going to do this for each type of convention or type of error, and the codes are on that cheat sheet, but we're just going to do one at a time at first. And it can be difficult. I'll read slowly. I'll be a nice reader. It's not always that simple. Sometimes the readers don't, and that's okay. We just have to try to keep up with them. But what I want you to know is the BRI is going to be so much easier than taking just a traditional running record, because it gives you the text and you can just write on top of the text the errors and the things that the student's doing. So I like to teach the good old-fashioned way on a running record like this, because it helps you understand how to record, and it helps you understand how to analyze the running record. So next week, when we have to give the BRI and we start talking about it, you're going to say, wow, this is easy. And so let's do our practice this week, and then you're not going to have to give a running record on a blank piece of paper anytime soon. And the more you give these, the more you practice this type of recording procedure, the easier it gets and the more natural it becomes. I listen to students read all day long. I do running records all day long. But when I first started doing running records, it felt very awkward to me. It was challenging, as with anything new that you do. And what we want is to get the best information about our reader in order to support them to moving forward in their development. So let's go back to page 11, taking running records item 2. You're going to put check marks out to the side of each line. I'm going to read this one accurately, and you're just going to practice making check marks for each word, okay? So if you're not ready, pause, get your page, and then turn it back on. So this is quack, quack, quack. Dad got out of the car and took us across the road to the school gate. He walked like a duck and made duck noises. Quack, quack, quack. Now, when you turn the page and check, you'll see that they wrote a check mark for each word out to the side of each line. They went down to the next line to put the check marks there so that you know which line the reader made the error. Again, this is how we would do this if we had a blank piece of paper or a running record form. There's lots of different formats out there, and they're all fine. It's just that we're getting some practice this way. If you need to pause to look at, to check your work, hopefully you got all the check marks. The reason also that we have the check marks is so that when we go back to analyze, we look at the error, we know where in the text that happened. And if you don't have the text there like we do today, you would probably need the book, if you're not very familiar with it, to go back and look to see, did that make sense, and that kind of thing. So now we're going to practice with substitutions. And this is item 4, and it says page 6 for quack, quack, quack. And remember, you're going to record what the student says on the top and what the text says on the bottom, as I put up there. Now, if a student attempts a word, you write the attempt. So if a student says, I like to see, and the word is horses, and they say, house. So you just record whatever they say, and then attempt to spell it. Just however they say it, just record. It's only one error no matter how many tries they have, but it's important that you record what the student says. And sometimes they will just say a word and keep going, and sometimes they will stop and try it and try again and try it again.